It was like we was both back in the older times. And I was a horseback, going through the mountains of a night, going through this pass in the mountains. It was cold, and there was snow on the ground. He rode past me and kept on going, never said nothing going by, just rode on past. And he had his blanket wrapped around him, his head down. When he rode past, I seen he was carrying fire in a horn, the way people used to do, and I could see the horn from the light inside of it, about the color of the moon. And in the dream, I knew that he was going on ahead. And he's fixing to make a fire somewhere out there, and all that dark, and all that cold. And I knew that whenever I got there, he'd be there. Then I woke up.
Stopping by woods on a snowy evening. Whose woods these are, I think I know. His house is in the village, though. He will not see me stopping here to watch his woods fill up with snow. My little horse must think it queer to stop without a farmhouse near, between the woods and frozen lake, the darkest evening of the year. He gives his harness bells a shake to ask if there is some mistake. The only other sound's the sweep of easy wind and downy flake. The woods are lovely, dark and deep, but I have promises to keep, and miles to go before I sleep, and miles to go before I sleep. Happy New Year, everybody. I hope that you had a lovely festive period and that you're settling into this very bright and very, very cold start to 2025. At least it is where I am. I'm stood at the edge of a farmhouse near some woods, which I thought was a perfect fitting setting. I'm taking my little horse out for a little trot. Sadly, I can't ride on him because he's just a little bit too small, and a dog, which is probably part of the problem here. As I speak, the sun is just properly peeking its head up, and we're seeing the start of the thaw. Well, a semi-thaw that might happen today. There's a huge water trough here, designed for livestock, which I'm trying to break the ice on, and I just can't. Oh, there we are, got it. One of the old size 8s did the trick, but yeah, this is a bit of a different poem, and definitely going to be more of a sketch today. I want to apologise for how long The Raven was. Not that I thought it was bad, it felt like a poem I really wanted to go into loads of depth on and spend some time on. You probably could gather, though, from my voice that I was struggling with a bit of end of term itis. And I was definitely not quite at 100% when it came to, how I was feeling. Felt very, very, very tired. And over the Christmas period, we've both been a bit unwell. My daughter wasn't very well for a little bit, and now she's fine again, thankfully. So we've just had one of those winter periods of ugh. But I was desperate to get that episode out, and thank you for all the people that have listened to it and have left me some nice comments. New Year. A strange old time, and this poem, I think, it just felt applicable, not least because of the idea of frost and cold. And actually, this is the kind of winter weather that I don't have any problem with whatsoever. I love it. If it was like this all the time in winter, I don't think I'd get anything like the depression that I sort of seem to get. It's crisp and cold and firm underfoot, and there's ice. No snow, but that's just living in the southeast of England, really. We don't tend to get much in the way of snow. I had this poem in my head at some sort of ungodly hour when I was trying to feed my daughter, and I was half awake, half asleep, and I kept thinking about that last couple of lines. So, because I'm still on my winter break at the moment and I go back on Monday, I thought I'd give you a little snip of a vignette of this poem, a little sketch, to help you along in these early days of January, which are always a bit all over the place. We sort of come into the new year with all sorts of optimism and ideas, and good on you, by the way, if that's you. And then the other bit of it is trying to sort of look for the good and look for the positive in the world when you can. And there is a lot of it out there, but it just feels like sometimes you have to look quite hard. And right now, it is a really beautiful day, like I said. So I'm going to talk about this poem in as much detail as I think it needs. And what I'll say about it, I hope, gives you more of an understanding of it. And if it doesn't do that, I hope you can just enjoy listening to me ramble while I walk through this frosty, cold landscape. I'll talk about Frost himself later on. I'll talk about the poem more and the mechanics of it. And this is a very tight rhyme scheme. I know I use that word a lot, but it's worth mentioning that despite the time period that Robert Frost is writing, when modernism is very much taking hold and we've got more experimental ideas around how to arrange a poem coming out, we get more of a classic approach. He's always had that classic approach. That's sort of what makes him quite unique, I think, among some of his contemporaries. When you read this poem for the first time, you can't help but hear the beat, almost like a little clip-clop of horses' hooves. It has this journey about it. It has this sense of forward motion, which I think makes for such a difference. And it's very mysterious. Who is our horseman? Where are they going? Why are they going there? It doesn't matter as much. What matters is this feeling that we get of real, I don't know, I want to sort of see this landscape with my mind's eye, but also it's bleak and kind of forbidding, as well as being comforting and secretive too. A feeling of being hidden in the woods. I know this is something I've talked about before with woods and forests as symbols in poetry. Come on, boy. My dog is a little bit freaked out by all the ice. He's Portuguese, he doesn't really understand this stuff. Come on, boy. We get a nice opening, really, with this half-known question. Whose wood these are, I think I know. This idea of almost trespass. Feeling like he shouldn't really be here, but he thinks it should be okay. He thinks he knows who own the woods, and he can sort of park up there for the night. But almost it's moot. He will not see me stopping here to watch his woods fill up with snow. That sense of ownership, that sense of nature being owned by man, but also it not really mattering. He's almost a poacher of poetry, if that isn't too stupid to say. He's definitely sleeping rough, though. And given that this is a poem written in 1923, it isn't so far-fetched, actually, to imagine somebody in a sort of frontier town, travelling by horseback and camping out in the woods. It's all very manly and very rugged, isn't it? My first thought is of Blazing Saddles, but that's because I'm very immature. But there is something very sort of seductive about this idea of travelling solo, no words needing to be spoken, just you and your horse. And the idea that even the horse thinks something's up. Thinks, well, why on earth are we stopping here? It's freezing cold, there's no farmhouse, and the darkest evening of the year. I think we all have these moments with the seasons, and especially winter. I quite like it when people say, "Oh yeah, it's the longest night of the year, it's the shortest night of the year, it's the whatever night of the year. It's only going to get lighter from now on." And I love that optimism. I also don't totally buy it half the time. I feel like winter is long. Winter is very long in all of its guises, and we sort of haven't had the full dark frost just yet. I think we've got it as of now. And obviously for me, being a winter baby, I do love this time of year when it's like this. I think the part of winter I can't abide is when it's wet and a bit drab. But this real sense of how dark it is, how hidden they both are, and how weary they both are. Even the horse doesn't really want to stop here. They want to stop somewhere a bit better. A little bit more comfort maybe. And giving his harness bells a shake. You can almost hear this sound echoing in the... well, actually maybe not echoing. I think if there's one thing that I am sad about there being no snow today, it's that you get a very different sound quality in deep, deep snow. You get a sense of, well, deadening, the opposite of an echo, a muffle, really. And that, I think, is where this poem captures that, really, this sound of the bells and the snow, but also there's no other sound except for like the faint wind, the sweep of easy wind and downy flake. These very quiet but cold noises, and the dampening of noise. Not being from an alpine country where we get snow all the time, I think I've always been quite amazed when you do go somewhere like that. I was very lucky as a kid. I got to go skiing. Not every year. Parents definitely couldn't have afforded that, but we had a period of about maybe 2 to 3 years. We had some friends who had a deal at some sort of chalet out in Austria. We used to get a bus which took us from Dover through to a place called Meyerhofen in Austria. And it was a big ski resort, a big snowboarding resort. There was a glacier and all this. But actually I remember first time being there, aged about sort of 12, I remember getting all my sort of woolly hat and gloves and scarf and everything on and going out into the snow. And I was so excited to be surrounded by snow like this. And after about a day of it, you become pretty bloody sick of it, actually. You realise how treacherous it is, how hard it is to actually travel anywhere. And how it gets underneath your clothes and how it sort of becomes, right in amongst all of your features. You're permanently sniffling. Snow and winter and stuff, it looks beautiful, but it's damn inhospitable. And I think we really get a sense of that here. I mean, this weary traveller, you can imagine him lighting a very small fire and having to sit as close by to it as possible to try and stay warm. And yeah, it does not smack of comfort. But also there is something outwardly very beautiful about it, very majestic about this landscape. And he even says the woods are lovely, dark and deep. So this feeling of, yes, this is a beautiful place and I'm very, very lucky to be here, despite the cold, despite everything else. And then we get this turn, this little turn. But I have promises to keep, and miles to go before I sleep, and miles to go before I sleep. The last line, repeated, I think makes this poem go from being just good and very interesting to being legitimately chilling in more of a, I don't know, I don't know if I find it bleak or sad. I don't actually. I find there's something very, very warming about that last line, but also incredibly weary. A feeling of somebody trying to get somewhere. And to any poetry students listening who want to know why that last line works so well, I would ordinarily think that repetition of a line can't be brilliant. It's unoriginal. It literally repeats the entirety of the line. But that's what works. And miles to go before I sleep. It's stunning, and something about it for me will always conjure up an image of your man trying to get through something. Maybe these miles aren't entirely physical. Maybe he can only sleep when he realises that his work is done, his mission is accomplished. And when you are sleep deprived, or if you're staying up late and you're thinking of things, the winter landscape, this sort of white, cold, glaring canvas, if you like, making you think of all the things that you've done and will do and want to do and have promised to do. What makes it so alluring, but also maybe so difficult to sleep and to rest from it all, is what he really wants. Is this a sleep of death? He can't finish yet. His work isn't yet done. He must keep going forward right up until the very end. Or is this more of a sleep of a wholesome nature? But he can't have that until he's absolutely sure that he's got where he needs to go. Something about this poem, I don't know if it became an inspiration, I can't find any evidence for it, but it feels like there might have been some small link of inspiration with the ending for No Country for Old Men, one of my favourite films, when the speech from Tommy Lee Jones's character, the sheriff, talks about his dream, where he's out riding with his father and he's out in the cold and they're going to make a fire, and he realises that wherever he ends up his father will be there as well. And Tommy Lee Jones himself said that the speech had a contemplation of hope, a dream about however dark and cold the world might be, however long the ride it might be, that at the end you know you'll go to your father's house and it will be warm, or to a fire that your father has carried and built for you. And that final line that he says, and then I woke up. Maybe that's who these woods belong to. A father, his father, the Holy Father, who knows? But it's worth thinking about. It was like we was both back in older times, and I was on horseback, going through the mountains of a night. Going through this pass in the mountains. It was cold, and there was snow on the ground, and he rode past me and kept on going. Never said nothing going by. He just rode on past, and he had his blanket wrapped around him and his head down. When he rode past, I see he was carrying fire in a horn, the way people used to do, and I could see the horn from the light inside of it, about the colour of the moon. And in the dream, I knew that he was going on ahead, and he was fixing to make a fire somewhere out there in all that dark and all that cold. And I knew that whenever I got there, he would be there. And then I woke up. And of course, one of the great things about the film that I've always loved is actually the title. For those in the know, it's from the first line of Sailing to Byzantium by none other than the big man himself, Yeats. Even if you didn't know that and you don't care about it, the fact is that monologue is very, very haunting, and I think it has a lot of links with the poem that we've just been looking at. This is a poem that, for me, the last line, or the last two lines, they stay. Miles to go before I sleep. It's a simple idea expressed simply, but in that iambic tetrameter, which is consistent throughout the poem, that makes it just lodge in your mind. And when it comes to dreams, I think I would be remiss to not talk a little bit about sort of how some of that works for me. I celebrated, in inverted commas, my dad's birthday yesterday. My dad would have been 67. It's easy for me to keep track of the years because obviously my dad and I were 30 years apart, almost to the month. I'm born February 4th and he was January the 2nd. And I still try to always keep in mind that something about that sequence in the film, that image of his father going ahead of him, and he even says it's strange because in the dream, he's older, but actually he died earlier than the age I am now. So in many respects, I'm the older man. And maybe as I've become older and as I've become a dad, that feeling of growing older and changing with the seasons, each winter seeming to bring a new chrysalis, if you like, of ice and snow, which we then emerge from. But also the feeling of change. This time last year I was also a dad, but I certainly feel older and more haggard now than I did in the early stages of 2024. Probably because I've had an entire year of looking after a small humanoid who doesn't sleep brilliantly. But also the feeling of not being able to talk to my own dad about some of that stuff, and the image of him going forward with the fire, and he just knows that wherever he'll be, he will also be. I think it's a lovely counterpoint to the poem, and you can come at me if you like and say you're well off base here, Riley. You've got that completely wrong. It's got nothing to do with it, but it's a link that I've made for myself because all imagery, all poetry, all words and drama, they are all supposed to link together. And that monologue at the end of that film, a film of intense violence and fear and jeopardy, I think it perfectly caps that sense of what are we all doing here? Why are we doing these things? Why are we making these journeys and these promises that we have to keep? Obviously, I think of Tommy Lee Jones's character being a sheriff and somebody upholding the law, but ultimately he fails. He cannot stop the killer. The killer is too dangerous and too well resourced to be stopped, and yet he's able to survive, which is its own success, I suppose. And maybe it's because I've seen some of my ideals drop away this year as I've become more and more tired, and I felt that the noble pursuit of whatever promises I think I have to keep, not just in my job but in life, sometimes I go, yeah, that's grand, but I do also need to think about me and if I can do it. And if I can't do it, then maybe I need to stop and take a moment. But as poems go, it's a lovely, crisp, wintery poem which has this eternal last sort of image for me. I can imagine him falling asleep as he says that last line, our poetic speaker. And just a few notes on Frosty himself. What an interesting guy. Very much growing up at a time of massive political change in the US, and spent some time obviously over here in England, as all the best writers do, and had arguably one of the most decorated careers of a living poet, mentioned by none other than JFK himself in the unfortunate year, of course, of 1963. But his poetry endures, and obviously over here we don't really study the American poets like we should, but his poetry endures because of its classicism, I think. And we see examples of this in literature all the time. Some of the most quintessentially English and British sounding writers actually have spent time in America, P.G. Wodehouse being a great example here. because for the most part, I think there is a yearning to be involved in this pastoral imagery. You know, it makes me think, of course, he spent a lot of his time, despite being a San Francisco boy from birth, he spent a lot of his time in New England and Massachusetts, and you know, the landscape of those places is incredible. A place I've always wanted to go, by the way, and I hope I do get the chance one day. But the winters there as well, I can imagine, would be on an epic scale of cold and snow and ice. So he really captures that here, but also it's a gentle poem. It's a gentle journey poem, which at its heart has this beating heart of weariness, loneliness, and hope. All in all, not a bad poem to start the year off with. Thank you for listening, folks. I've been the Sketch Poet. Please do get in contact with me if you'd like to hear a particular poem. You can follow me on Blue Sky Socials if you want to interact with me on social media, or alternatively, just make sure you like and subscribe so that you get a new episode every time I release one. All the best and Happy New Year.